Hi there. I'm keeping this video short and focused because I want you to pay attention to these specific points. There's a lot of theorizing about what could a Jon Snow sequel spin-off to Game of Thrones be. What is it about? A lot of that is tied up in, is this accurate to the books or not? That it's going to drag up the question that a lot of people didn't even ask after Season 8 of, was that even the book ending? And the thing they do is they try to stretch, well, that was in the book, it just happened to someone else. I mean, I think we all remember when they were going, well, the Sansa rape in Season 5 happens in the book just to another character. Well, then it's not the same. If it's, well, it happened, but we jumbled it up and mixed and matched characters. I don't want to get into that right now because it's an open question of how accurate was this. For Jon Snow in particular, and relative to other characters, if it's focused on Jon, that wouldn't really change anything. But people ask, off the top of my head, what do I think, in all seriousness, what could it be about? Is it a sequel? Could it be a real sequel or not, based on those criteria? A lot of these are open questions. I'm trying to approach this rationally. Instead of fanboying out and listing off things, I want to see what does the setting offer? What would be the logical course of events here? The specific reason I started making this video is just one point, and the rest is okay, let's logically talk out the rest. This is the thing that spurred me to make this. I saw someone giving a really illogical wish list of what they wanted. It wasn't on YouTube, it was somewhere else. And it was that doublethink thing where they were simultaneously saying, and I'm not making this up, it's so great it's going to be a sequel to the story, and insisting this is the true story of the books. This is, with Martin's blessing, a continuation of his story because it was basically the same. And within the same, message thread, they said, what do I think the plot will be? I think they'll bring back that unused fake Aegon plot with the Blackfires and the Golden Company, and have Jon come south only to then have to fight off someone claiming to be Rhaegar's real son. Like, those two things, they said, this is going to be a sequel to the story of the books because the show is the same as the book outline Martin assuredly told them. And the plot will be a recycling of the fake Aegon plot, which is already in motion by the end of Book 5. And we have preview chapters of for Book 6. I'm not saying that without the presence of Benioff and Weiss, but with real writers making entertaining fanfic, that this couldn't be, it might actually be an entertaining drama, not reflecting the story of the books at all, but guys, if they're reusing an abandoned plot from the first 5 books, by definition, it isn't a sequel. I do not know how this, I'm not going to put it up because I'm not going to shame them, that you could even want a fake Aegon thing and they could make a decent show out of it. I'm not even dismissing that, I'm just saying, by definition, that isn't a sequel. And this person was so hyped up that, and it's a sequel specifically to the books, not just to the TV show. Those are mutually exclusive ideas. And this isn't, I hope this isn't too widespread of an idea, because not a lot of people who watch the show also even know who fake Aegon is. But it was bizarre, so I needed to get on my microphone and just say, how can it be both fake Aegon and a sequel to the books? That doesn't make sense. It's not an original story of what happens after that. So, nothing that's recycled could be a sequel. Now, in terms of, are you asking, is this genuinely a sequel to the story of Martin's books, or is it like an alternate continuity that's split off, and you're getting a sequel to Game of Thrones? Well, that's that whole issue of, if you bring in other writers, it's like a story round. That Jon Snow isn't a real person, Daenerys isn't a person, other shows that have gotten ruined over time, sometimes so much bad writing happened that even if you brought in an entirely new set of genius writers, they couldn't fix any of this without time travel erasing multiple seasons of the story. because the writers, when you have like a rotating revolving door of head writers when things are in chaos. I'm thinking of Spider-Man's Clone Wars, the Clone Saga arc from the mid-90s, where it was some mess, and every subsequent guy was coming in retconning it. You can't really say, well, this is a sequel to that Spider-Man from the Clone Saga. Well, it wasn't a coherent thing in the first place. So I don't know, but I'm not saying they might actually, just because they have competent writers now, could make a show which in isolation is good. It's a question of, is it a sequel to the story of the books? If the TV, well, I'm thinking in terms of branching, logic branches here, the fork in the road here. On the one hand, if the TV show ending was fundamentally different from the books, it would be really hard for this to be a sequel to the book's story. Too much was changed. If the show was similar enough to the books, at least with respect to Jon Snow, that is a question. Because some people keep going, well, assuredly this won't be just Jon Snow. It'll be checking up on the politics with Bran and Tyrion and Sansa and Arya and all of that. Well, then they wouldn't call it the Jon Snow show. Because the whole thing is one big interlocking puzzle, it would be really hard for the whole thing to be a sequel to the books. Because, if it's just Jon in the Northern Wilderness, and his story is similar enough to where he ends up in the books, you can kind of do that. If it's a small-scale character study. But once you get to Bran, you have to deal with, are the Iron Islands and Dorne independent in the books or not? And everything that happened to the Martells in the TV show would, in a sense, have ripple effects on all the other politics storylines of Southern Westeros. I don't think, if it involves the other people, it could really do that. It might for the other stuff. However, a more fundamental principle occurred to me. It's Kit Harington's idea. It's not George R. R. Martin's idea. That they said, Kit came to us. Therefore, if it's Kit's idea, it's not George R. R. Martin's sequel, is it? He might have even given it his blessing as a good follow-up idea, and that's where it gets complicated. But the fact that it's something Kit came up with in general principle is a point leaning against that, and I admit we won't know until we see it what exactly are they going with. It could be just George being nice and letting Kit have a standalone adventure to show, here's me being Jon Snow, talking normally and not going, I don't want it. It could be a really cool idea he came up with, and that Martin thinks is great. I'm thinking like how X-Men movies are branching off and rebooting all the time of, well, what is a sequel to the Dark Phoenix saga or the Clone Saga? Is it a sequel to Chris Claremont's Dark Phoenix saga, or the Dark Phoenix of X-Men 3, or the rebooted Dark Phoenix? And then there's a sequel to the sequel, and it branches. It's hard to say that the question is this truly a sequel to the story of the books? Hypothetical scenario, best case, is if Kit Harington came up with a good idea that George R. R. Martin essentially adopted, because he's a living author, that would be interesting. But on the other hand, there's if a corporation goes, I'm gonna make a sequel to The Lord of the Rings, when Tolkien is dead and cannot give his blessing to it. And you could even make a sequel to The Lord of the Rings in the sense of, can we have a reunion special showing a slice of life, day in the life in the Shire with Sam and his children reading through history books as a half-hour reunion special type of deal. It wouldn't be a sequel. It would be, well, Sam lived the rest of his life in peace. But to catch up with these people, I could see that. The Hobbits having a reunion around Yule time. They don't have Christmas because it's BC, but you know what I mean? It's something like it, but a hardcore, large-scale sequel, that is difficult. I don't think it could be a sequel because of the fact that it was Kit's idea. Though, maybe he influenced Martin, and that's a best-case thing, but based on, I don't want to say intuition, but the context of this, that Martin approved it, I don't think this is going to be the large-scale, continent-spanning story that a lot of people think it is. I've seen people going, oh no, they're going to resurrect Daenerys, and it's going to be this continent-wide war again. What if it's an intimate character study with few characters in it? What if it never goes south of the wall again? And the example I've been using, well, I actually used Days of Future Past X-Men as an example of what if they have a time travel reboot. I think this will be a lot like, or could be a lot like, what I think is kind of underrated because it was a good Hugh Jackman performance, the second standalone Wolverine movie, The Wolverine, where it's actually a direct follow-up to X3, but it's trying to deal with, he's alone in the Canadian wilderness, barely has contact with logging camps occasionally every month for supplies, and he's just alone in the woods, but having conversations with his memory of Jean Grey, played by the same actress. They might not resurrect Daenerys, they might just have him dreaming about her and talking to her in his dreams, the way they do in that movie. And it's a character study. It's Wolverine and his grief in the woods, and then he goes to Japan and has adventures which are inspired by storylines from the comics. But that part where it's him alone in the woods, then he has to go do a war, maybe it'll be something, when I say character-driven, I mean like Kenobi in his isolation, like Wolverine isolated in the wilderness. You'd have Jon living relatively alone with the wildlings, and then like they get into a conflict, and it reminds him of what happened, and they resolve the conflict, and things end up. And it's a character study just for one last hurrah, but it isn't history-changing on a macro scale. It's a character piece, like The Wolverine, as a chance to make up for the previous Wolverine installment by Benioff, which was pretty bad. So it all goes in a circle, I guess. And the other option is, what if this is a giant reset they're making like X-Men Days of Future Past, because time travel exists in this universe, and Jon is a warg. Maybe I realize it doesn't need to make too much sense in universe. It'll be like how they killed off Poochie in The Simpsons. They'll go, Jon warged into the Weirwood in the past to reset everything, and eventually 10 years from now there's going to be a remake, but everything's going to be slightly different because it'll be closer to the books. They could do that. I'm not saying they will. I mean, because it has less assumptions, I'm going with, don't assume this will be a large-scale, continent-spanning thing with all the cast members. They called it a Jon Snow thing. It's an idea Kit had. Maybe it'll be something like Hugh Jackman's The Wolverine, where it's Wolverine in his solitude dealing with his grief, and a character study. However, one final thought that occurred to me, and I don't want to keep this longer than 15 minutes because that's the cutoff point here. As a history major, I don't believe in, and I'm always fighting people over this, that, well, we're English majors, death of the author, we get to read our own meaning into it. You aren't finding meaning, you're applying meaning. Your meaning, not Martin's meaning. So if you're guessing what you would do, that's impossible. You will not get an accurate guess based on what you want, because Martin might want something else. Maybe you're pro-war and Martin is anti-war. That when I'm studying writers as part of history, the way to understand someone's text is to understand, like, The Great Gatsby, what was the author trying to say in it based on their historical context? John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, what was he trying to say, that author's intended meaning? So when I try to figure out what is George R. Martin going to do, or what is his intended meaning, I look at his biography, I look at his experience with the anti-war movement, with his favorite writings, how his family used to be rich but was eventually very poor, and his mother married a longshoreman, and it deeply affected him, that the decline of civilization and all that. He really loved Lovecraft and all this romantic romance with the capital R literature about how, we used to be these great kings and now we're living in exile. All of that stuff. And so the thing that occurred to me, apart from, dear God, it can't be fake Aegon and a sequel, and maybe it'll be a character study like The Wolverine, it might have like a reset, but I'd be happy with like a standalone project. I'm going to leave you on this. Roger Zelazny's The Last Night of Camelot. That was a major influence on Martin. He was a living author who had a great influence on him. It is a famous short story. And one of Martin's major writing credits, screenwriting credits for the 1980s version of The Twilight Zone was a live-action TV adaptation of The Last Night of Camelot. And I am starting to wonder if the Jon Snow sequel is... I've already said it might be an epilogue like The Wolverine. What if it's an epilogue in the style of The Last Night of Camelot? Seems much more in keeping with something Martin would really like. Because the basic story is Lancelot, cursed to live forever, lives to the present day. And he's an old but healthy man, and he stumbles back upon where Merlin has been in time stasis due to magic for centuries. And Lancelot's lived through it all, and he knows the time of magic and heroes has passed. People don't have kings anymore. There's just democracy. All of the great and wonderful things, the good and the bad, are gone. It's like Tolkien, that the elves are gone, Sauron's gone, but so are the elves. The age of magic has ended. All these great and wonderful things, and everything's just kind of banal now. That Lancelot tries to tell Merlin this. He refuses, and he says he's going to use his magic to take over the world. So he creates a champion out of armor, and Lancelot has to fight that magical champion at Stonehenge. And this led to Martin's infamous thing about, they told me that we could film at Stonehenge or we could have a horse, but we couldn't have Stonehenge and the horse. Remember that phrase, Stonehenge and the horse. It came up a lot in yelling about budget for Game of Thrones. I'll talk about that more in other videos. But this was a big influence on Martin. He loved it, and making and adapting it was a big event for him. Both in terms of just as a fan of it, and in terms of learning to be a TV writer. The Last Night of Camelot, where the message is, and Lancelot wins and basically just walks off into the sunset, that the time of magic has ended, and the age of legends is fading into memory, and just as Martin's family used to be rich, and all this great and wonderful bygone age is gone, and it's fading away, sailing into the west like Frodo. That's what's going on. Thought occurred, I've loaded this in the wiki. I wrote the article the book wiki. I wrote the article on Firewhites. Martin said that, okay, this is two things. Martin said that Beric Dondarrion is basically a Firewhite. That's the term he used. We don't know what that means, but they said, what is Beric? Well, he's technically not alive. He doesn't need to eat. He doesn't need to drink. Bodily functions, that he's basically a white that can think. And his injuries don't entirely heal, animated by a different kind of magic. And Season 7, they mention in passing in the commentary that Jon is like Beric now, when he's resurrected, because it's the same method with Red R'hllor's magic, that Jon, like Beric, is basically a Firewhite now. If he has no bodily functions, he has no functional, precious bodily fluids. I think he's sterile now. It's not like Jon is going to triumphantly come south of the wall, resurrect Daenerys and marry her and have children, or come south, fight Daenerys as a zombie, and then become king and father a dynasty. I'm pretty sure he's sterile. But it's that whole Flying Dutchman thing that, or like, if you will, Maglor from the Silmarillion, where I think it's going to be like Lancelot, who has lived 1,000 years into the present day as just this wanderer in The Last Night of Camelot, that we keep thinking and assuming that this will be set a few years after Game of Thrones and meet up with all the same people. Given that Jon is an immortal Firewhite, what if this skips 100 years into the future, or 1,000? This could happen any number of years into the future, and none of the other cast members could be involved in the pitch whatsoever. Jon might just be the whole wandering Merlin-style Lancelot guy, and it could be basically a short-run series that's a riff on The Last Night of Camelot, this 500-year-old Jon Snow Firewhite just going south, seeing that all of the magic has died out of the world. That's the thing that Leaf says to Bran, even in the 5th book, that one way or another magic is leaving the world. This isn't the triumphant return of dragons. This is our last gasp. She says, There weren't that many of us. We're going to be gone. She says the dire wolves will outlive all of us, all the old ancient wonderful, like mammoths and dragons and things. The dire wolves will be the last to go, but even they will eventually. All these magical creatures and races have no place in the world that men are building, the world the Maesters are building. So maybe the story of the Jon Snow sequel is loosely like what George R. R. Martin intended, in that, look, we know Jon Snow is going to be resurrected in the books, which means he's going to be kind of undead and technically immortal. And what if this is like one of those things where it can be a standalone, and I'm now thinking of Wolverine as in Logan, where it's a skip ahead into the future and it's removed enough from the immediate events of the X-Men movies that it doesn't really matter what happened in the previous movies. There's arguments that Logan, the third Wolverine movie, is an alternate continuity from any of the other movies. It's a forking branch yet again, but it's a potential ending of this is one of the ways it could go. And that one sentence, John eventually goes to live north of the wall with the wildlings. Second sentence, he comes back hundreds of years later and it's just him witnessing that there's no magic in the world anymore as a somber epilogue. That could also be a thing. Also doesn't exclude that at the end of it, John could have a time travel reset with the last Weirwood to reset everything. But it could be both. It could be both. But the idea that the big change is John is a Firewhite. He's not going to have a family, or if he does, it's an adopted family. He's not going to come back and father a dynasty. He's a Firewhite. It could involve a time jump on the scale of centuries. But the reason I made this video, and yeah, okay, now it's 20 minutes long, but it's not a sequel if it's reusing the fake Aegon storyline. Do you even remember that they killed the Golden Company? Varys is dead. They never even introduced the Blackfires by name in the TV show. That is absurd that they bring back for I don't think Kit would want to do that. And it wouldn't really address the core issues of his character, because it's just revisiting, you're really Rhaegar's son. We've already gone through that. So it might be a time skip, what they call on TV tropes, a distant finale, a distant epilogue, where it's a time skip of like 1,000 years. Jon Snow is the last knight of Camelot, coming to give an epilogue and a eulogy for the world of magic left behind. And maybe a time travel reset. What do you guys think? I'm just trying to sort my thoughts on all this, and I'm intrigued by what they're doing.